Hello, everyone. I'm John Handy, Communications Director for the House Republican Caucus, and I'd like to welcome you to our Republican media availability today. With us on the House side are House Republican Leader J.T. Wilcox from the 2nd Legislative District and House Republican Floor Leader Jacqueline Maycumber from the 7th District. And from the Senate, we have Senate Republican Leader John Braun from the 20th District and Senator Mike Padden from the 4th District, also ranking member on the Senate Law and Justice Committee. With that, I will turn it over to House Republican Leader Representative J.T. Wilcox for some remarks.
Thanks very much, John, and thanks to all of you who are attending. We've said many times how much we appreciate that, and I think I've always thought that we're partners in many ways in terms of being the folks that have to look out for the majority and try to point out when they are pursuing things that may not be the best thing for the state of Washington. We're past first cutoff now, and so things are beginning to take shape. There are some good things and some bad things. Among the things that I'm disappointed in is there's clearly no appetite on the part of the majority for taking the historic surpluses over the last few years and sharing those with taxpayers. No interest in broad-based tax relief. Also, apparently no interest in rolling back the deeply unpopular long-term care tax that I think most people who have carefully evaluated it understand that it's unsustainable and not very helpful. And then one other thing, we heard over and over that you can't address emergency powers in the middle of an emergency. Well, the emergency's over, and apparently there's no interest on the part of the majority to address them even now. I think that's a mistake. On the other hand, there are some good things. I think at the top of my list is some historic cooperation in the Ag Committee. It's gone a little under the radar over here in the House, but probably one of the best committee chairs in Olympia decided that everything that was going to advance was going to advance in a bipartisan way. They rolled out, I think, 6 bills on the last day, most of them unanimous, many of them surprisingly difficult policy that was carefully worked. And I think that's a great pattern for going forward. Elected representatives, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, thinking for themselves, deciding things in public, not deciding everything inside caucuses. And I would commend that to all of you and all of us here in Olympia as a pretty positive way to go forward for the best of our state, not just politics. So, John, back to you.
Senator Braun.
Okay, got it. Wasn't sure which John. So good morning, John Braun, 20th Legislative District. So yeah, 44th day, we are approaching fiscal cutoff. I'll just repeat the things we've been focused on. Public safety. Blake is going to move out of Ways and Means this week, and we're working on continuing to improve that bill. I think the process is working as it should. It's getting multiple hearings. It's going to get work from both sides, and I think we are on a path to have a bipartisan bill. At least I'm hopeful. Pursuit is a little more complicated. We have the study bill that may be amendable in Ways and Means, but I think everyone's hoping that the pursuit bill that was passed out of committee last week in the House comes through. It's a better bill to work off of, but there's still a lot of uncertainty, and frankly, the Democratic majorities on both sides of the aisle are not being very clear on their intentions, and so we're a little worried about that. On the issue of just providing more training and more funding for police officers, I think both those issues have bipartisan support. I think they'll both be dealt with inside the budget, and will certainly, if that's the case, be a part of the budget that Republicans support. On affordability, food, gas, housing, childcare, healthcare, a lot to work on. Clearly, I think the things that are getting the most attention are housing, and there's some good bills moving forward on that. We're hearing a permitting bill in Ways and Means this week. We have the middle housing bill. We have the transit bill. So I think that there's a path we could do some good stuff, but we have to be concerned. There's a couple growth management bills in Ways and Means this week that's going to have to be decided by cutoff that will do harm, that will bring in environmental justice and climate change into the growth management process, which is always already too slow and not reactive enough to the growth in our state and the housing needs in our state. So we have some challenges there that we got to work on. On healthcare, I think a lot of the activity is focused around how do we help get our hospitals back on track? How do we make sure they have the workforce they need to provide the care our communities require, and how they do it in a way that keeps them fiscally sound and is the backbone of our healthcare system, and do it affordably. So there's a lot to work on there. There's several bills that are going to affect that. And then the last thing I'll mention is on education. We are going to hear today a bill on making sure the remaining ESSER funds are directed towards learning loss, that we actually focus on getting students back on track at that grade level. We have a ton of work to do there, and frankly, we are not even holding our own yet. We continue to fall further behind, so we have a lot of work to do there. But making sure we use the ESSER funds effectively is one of the very best steps and first steps to get there. So a lot of stuff going on. Actually, one more thing I'll mention on education. A nice article in the Seattle Times recently about special education. There is some work going on special education and increasing the cap. I think that's certainly a step in the right direction, and I'll support that, but there's a lot more to do there. First of all, just the cap isn't the only problem in funding. And the other thing is, and this is one of the things in the article, is these students need and deserve advocates for their learning plan. Some of them get it because their parents are deeply involved. Some of them don't, and those almost invariably fall further behind. This is an issue we've looked at in the legislature before. We've actually passed it out of the Senate before, but we've been unable to get the Democratic majority in the House to take this seriously. I hope the new attention will lead to more work on this issue and better outcomes. So I'll stop right there and turn it over. We're pleasure to have Senator Mike Patton with us today. Mike, if you'd like to make comments.
Well, thank you very much, John. And I've been focused a lot on criminal justice, public safety issues in my role on the Law and Justice Committee. And we have a crisis out there in our state. We have rampant drug use in some of our major cities, downtown areas. And we have an exodus. We have an exodus of businesses that are very concerned about the crime. So they are leaving our downtown areas. It's certainly true in Spokane, where a major office building has a 57% vacancy rate, and most of the others that are there are waiting for the lease to expire. So it's absolutely critical we do something about both the felony drug possession laws, the Blake decision, and the pursuit. I mean, we will look at motor vehicles. They went up 50% in 2022 after the law was changed. We had 45,000 stolen vehicles in our state. These are real people. These are victims. We don't hear about the victims very often, but they are suffering, and people are making decisions based on crime. So I am hopeful we can have meaningful legislation, but I'm very concerned on the pursuit bill that we may not even see one. My counterpart, Senator Dinger, has indicated very forthrightly that she doesn't want any pursuit bills this year. And it's kind of a desperate situation. I mean, we've had crazy stuff such as criminals fleeing police, calling police, saying, "Hey, you're not supposed to be chasing me." I mean, it's hard to believe this sort of thing is happening. On one other note, on housing, I'm very happy to see Senate Bill 5058 on condo liability reform pass the Senate unanimously. It's over in the House Housing and would allow for small 12-unit, 2-story condos to be built with some of the excessive regulations. It's almost the size of a large house, so we think the regulations ought to be more appropriate as they would be for a single-family house or a townhouse. So there's a lot going on. We're at a critical stage in the legislature, but I do think public safety is right up there as a top issue. And we'll now turn it over to somewhat of a neighboring district from mine in the 7th, Representative Maycumber.
Thank you. I would agree. I hear more from my constituency regarding just being safe in their homes and making sure their property is safe when they go to school and work. And the auto theft bill 1632 or 1682 was passed out of appropriations yesterday, and that changed the funding allocations for the auto theft fund. And it's so important that we talk about that process. But at the same time, now we need to have a pursuit bill. You can steal somebody's vehicle. And we heard just the most heart-crushing testimony in the House regarding young girls being killed because a vehicle was not pursued, and that individual hit two young girls. And it was, we move forward, and our pursuit policy at 1363 is not moved forward. We have the only vehicle would be the Senate, and that would be in a short conversation, that would be drones and technology. And we really need to talk about the human element in law enforcement and making sure people are safe, not just in pursuit, but throughout our communities. People want to feel safe walking down the street. People want to feel safe letting their kids walk to school. So we need to really make sure that we facilitate that human element in law enforcement and community policing, which I've been an advocate for many years.
All right, with that, we'll get to questions. I'd like to first go to Jerry Cornfield of the Herald.
Good morning. Thank you for taking our questions this morning. I wanted to ask, because it's the fiscal week, a lot of tax policy being discussed in the House this morning, and a couple of proposals. I wondered if you could comment on there's one to lift the 1% limit and increase and allow up to 3% to be imposed by local governments. And there's also one from the former speaker to create a new level of the REIT tax. I wonder if anyone's familiar enough to comment on those proposals and what they might or might not do to the housing policies you've been talking about.
Well, I think, first of all, we're sitting in a place where we have record setting revenues and also record setting revenue increases. The size of government is more than sufficient for the priorities of the people of Washington. And I think it's also inconceivable to think that increasing taxes on housing is a way to create more affordable and more available housing.
Did you have a follow-up, Jerry?
Let's ask Senator Braun. I missed the conversation on the Senate floor yesterday. Could you tell us why your caucus locked up against the bill for recess?
Sure. I mean, it's as simple as that. We are certainly a fan of recess. Many of us enjoyed recess many years ago, and our children enjoyed recess. We also think this is a decision best made by the school districts and by the school boards. We have continued to march down this path where the state legislature becomes the state school board, and I just think that's harmful to our districts. We have relatively rudimentary tools at the legislative level. We cannot react in a way that's responsive to individual communities and shape school policy curriculum in ways that reflect the community, and we shouldn't try. And this is another example where we're trying to dictate from the Olympia on what school districts ought to do. If parents are unhappy with the way recess is done in their school district, their right course of action ought to be able to go to the school board and have a discussion with their local school board member and get results that way, not have to come to the legislature to try to change the policy for the whole state.
Yeah, in addition, this was a solution looking for a problem that didn't exist. We have not heard from our school districts or our constituents that there's a big problem with recess. The local school boards are handling this. I mean, why have local school boards if the legislature is going to become the great school board in the sky, which we've done in a number of areas? A local control usually works best. These are independently elected individuals, and that's who ought to be making these decisions. So it was a tremendous overreach. One Democrat joined with us in opposing the legislation. Hopefully you folks over in the House can do something to either get rid of it or improve it somehow.
I'll say one more thing. It's very disappointing that the first education bill off the floor of the Senate is about recess when we have only 1 in 3 children passing at grade level for math and reading. I think we got our priorities wrong.
All right, next we will go to Melissa Santos of Axios.
Hi there. Some of you already spoke about the pursuits bill a little bit, but I just wanted a little more clarity. Since it was amended before it went out, you'd like to see everything that was reasonable suspicion before go back to reasonable suspicion and kind of put a pause on it, and not sort of their revised list of offenses that qualify reasonable suspicion for pursuit. Do I have that right? Like, you think that it needs to go all the way back, and that revised version that passed out of committee is still insufficient?
Melissa, are you asking about the House Policy
Yeah,
1363?
I'm sorry, I am asking about the House policy, yeah.
Actually, I mean, to bring it up to reasonable suspicion is just sometimes just having somebody sit down so we can have the discussion. We had a suspect walk past the police in a double homicide in Okanagan twice, and they couldn't ask the suspect to come here, sit down, detain him in any way. And they're still at large, by the way. So yeah, reasonable suspicion sometimes just calms the situation and protects lives. To keep it up at probable cause is some of the most difficult levels to reach, and people are suffering from it. You're seeing the increase in crime since that policy, an increase in violent crime, an increase in stolen vehicles and pursuits. Everything is not better. The numbers aren't better since we've gone to reasonable suspicion, and just having that everybody have a seat is some of the most powerful things you can do in law enforcement to just de-escalate the situation. I agree. We need to find that happy medium where law enforcement can do their jobs. And I do have concerns that the vehicle will be the Levick bill in the Senate, which uses more technology in surveillance than the human element. And not without the human element, you don't have that community policing, that getting to know the kids, getting to know the business owners. And I don't think drones will protect me and my family as we walk down the streets.
Yeah, I want to add a couple things. First of all, the second Levick bill that's currently in play is really just a study. I mean, it studies doesn't even use drones. It just studies using other means. So I think it's a far cry short of actually responding. But to your question, Melissa, do we insist on going back to the law prior to this, the what I would say the bad law passed in 2021? No, I think we didn't see a need to change it then, but we have consistently negotiated for a middle ground. Last year, many of us voted on a bill that would have included crimes against persons with reasonable suspicion. I think now we would like to see that, at least that. I think there's an growing concern that it's got to include auto theft and kind of the driveaways. The damage that auto theft is doing to our citizens is enormous. We don't think of, it's not a physical crime, but the impacts are enormous. If you're a single mom, you're a family struggling, to make ends meet, and you lose your vehicle, that could lead to the loss of a job because you can't get to work, which leads to the loss of your home because you lost your job. I mean, it is devastating when this happens to people, and we can't let it go on. We can't let the lawlessness continue. So do we insist that it go back to prior to 2021? We don't, and we haven't. Do we want much better, a better outcome than what is being proposed in either the study bill in the Senate or the kind of the light version in the House? Absolutely. But we're going to continue to work the legislative process to get there.
Thank you.
Law enforcement has told us that the criminals are fleeing because they know the police cannot pursue them. One of the areas that were one of the worst in the nation is our cannabis shops, where they have a lot of cash there due to the federal banking laws. And because of the pursuit law, there's more violence, more crime in the cannabis shops in our state than any other state of the nation.
Did you have a follow-up, Melissa?
No, I think that covers it. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we will go to Laurel Demkovich from the Spokesman Review.
Hi, good morning. I'm not sure who exactly can address this, but I'm wondering if someone can talk about your priorities surrounding childcare and early learning this year. I know that providers specifically have said that they, still need some support, especially or even after the Fair Start for Kids Act. So I'm wondering if you can talk about what you think might be needed on that front.
So I'll jump in there. So, sadly, as we try to address all the problems we have, challenges we have in our state, I don't think this issue is getting enough attention. But I would start with this: if the state ought to do we need to do less in terms of over-regulating childcare and early learning and do more in terms of paying our fair share. What I mean by that is we've done some good intentioned over the last 5 to 10 years to improve the quality of childcare and improve early learning. And what we have done is make it less and less accessible to the average Washingtonian family by driving up the cost. And at the same time, we've not, where we contribute to the cost of childcare, we have often not paid our share, as you think of it. So what it does is to make ends meet, the child care services charge more for the kind of the folks in the middle who aren't getting state help. So they carry more of the burden, and that just makes it more difficult for folks who aren't getting. So the single thing we can do, if you ask me, is make sure that we're paying a fair rate and stop interfering and driving additional regulations for something human beings have done for millennium, which is look after each other's children.
You know, Republicans and Democrats this year have agreed in a variety of areas that something that is dragging down our economy and dragging down employment opportunities for people is an unnecessary insistence on qualifications, degrees, et cetera. And the child care system is, you know, a case study in what that does. It achieves exactly the opposite of what it's intended to do. It makes it more expensive, less available, and creates problems across our economy. We should learn from that.
I think the only thing I can add is this is one of the biggest issues across the board. And as someone who worked with 3 children, it really does impact your future and the economy. And I haven't seen many policies move forward. I did have concerns about some of the bills that we passed a few years ago regarding childcare and that investment and how that would reach many parts of my district. So making sure that the policies we have passed that are supposed to increase childcare accessibility are being implemented across the state. I have a county with not one childcare center that the community has come together, private, public, across the board, helping to invest in a facility. So this is making sure that we actually get the policies that haven't been implemented throughout the state of Washington, I think is one of the biggest issues. And I have been looking for policy that move forward, and I haven't seen much.
Did you have a follow-up, Laurel?
Yeah, on another topic and kind of following up, I think on something Senator Braun said about hospitals and healthcare. I'm just wondering what you're supporting or what you're looking at to help fund hospitals. As you mentioned, they, have been struggling financially, and we've talked about staffing shortages, but anything specific to help with, their budget side of things.
I think the main budget effort to help hospitals is what I think they're calling it SNAP. I can't tell you what that stands for, but it's essentially a new version of the hospital safety net. The hospital safety net as we use right now is no longer going to be allowed in a couple of years by the federal government. They do allow a different option that involves more investment, but also more matching from the federal government. And the Hospital Association has come together, proposed a plan that would do this, and that money would go into increasing that additional money would go into increasing Medicaid rates. I think that's a thoughtful and effective plan. I think it will get traction. I'm sure in the Senate, I suspect in the House as well, as we make sure that hospitals, we kind of protect their bottom line and to make sure. The most worrisome thing is, especially for our rural hospitals, that they go out of business because they just can't afford the current cost of staffing in particular. And that's the other place we can help. I think there's a lot of bills out there talking about our shortage of nursing staff. Some of them good, some of them not so good. So the staffing ratio could do enormous harm. They're trying. They recognize the problem, but they have the wrong solution. It could actually put more hospitals out of business. But then we have some good bills. I'm drawing a blank on the number right now, but Senator Holy has a great bill that works on nursing. Essentially training and qualifying more nurses. We need to do other things like that. The nursing compact bill would be another way we can get more folks into the profession. So we need to work on ways to make their life more, reduce regulation, reduce barriers, and reduce costs, and also make sure that we're, again, as I said earlier with child care, we got to make sure the state's paying its share of the cost, and we do that primarily with Medicaid.
I just point out that the nurse compact bill passed out of the healthcare committee on a 7-3 vote. It's sponsored by Senator Mullet, but all the Republicans on the committee supported it. And I hope it can go the distance this year. It's kind of been bottled up, and there's a lot of support, especially in the border communities and the military communities. And I think it's a good piece of legislation. Hopefully it can move forward.
And the Representative Volt's nurse compact moved forward in the House. And I think that's a great, and to piggyback on what Senator Braun mentioned, the state needs to pay their fair share. I had House Bill 1713 that talked about payment parity in the state. And we're really seeing those healthcare deserts where both where those high Medicaid, Medicare rates are. And we really need to make sure those rates come up, or we're not going to see the healthcare providers and the access in those areas.
All right, next we'll go to Drew Mickelson on King 5.
Morning, thank you for your time here. I wanted to ask about a bill that's going to come up in transportation in the House today, 1832, looking at the road usage charge, the pay-by-mile system. It's the first formal transition, I guess, away from the gas tax. It'd be voluntary in 25 and then mandatory in 30. Is this something either of your caucuses are willing to support? And if not, how do we replace the gas tax, because fewer people are needing to pay that like they used to?
Well, no, we're not going to support that. It's terrible for the people that live in the districts that we represent. You know, we are also seeing record revenues coming into our transportation system from a variety of sources. It doesn't all have to be the gas tax. And clearly, this is aimed at people who often are lower income, that live farther away from employment centers, because that's where they can afford the cost of living and afford housing. They shouldn't be penalized further because they have to commute.
And it's also not protected under the 18th Amendment. I mean, if we're going to talk about transportation dollars, it should go to the roads. And that policy does not have it protected. And we are already paying, and you're seeing an indirect tax on the cap and trade and Climate Commitment Act. So we really need to make sure that we're not harming food production and transportation of that product, and then the people that are working so hard to bring it to the cities. But that policy is not protected, that fund.
Senator Wilson had a great budget last year, and we proposed at the Senate Republican budget that would have taken money from the sales tax for auto sales and moved that from the general fund to transportation, would have replaced some of that funding from the gas tax, and is a great idea. There's a direct tie into it. There's record surplus. It would have been a perfect time to do that. It still could be done. That's, to me, the solution we ought to be looking at.
Yeah, even if you did that in a small way, say, for instance, you took the sales tax on electric vehicles and said, we're going to devote that to road maintenance, that would grow over time and would be a significant, consistent funder to transportation. And we have to look beyond our traditional ways, and the road usage tax, I just don't see a future for that. That's not going to gain support. It's unpopular, frankly, on both sides of the aisle for many different reasons, and it's the wrong answer to a real problem.
Did you have a follow-up, Drew? All right. We will go to Claire Withercombe of the Seattle Times.
Hi, good morning. My question is for Senator Braun. You touched on Blake briefly and said that it looked like the version now could be a bipartisan policy. I wonder if you could speak just a little bit more specifically to what your caucus has been advocating for in the development of Blake, and kind of what components of the bill have come from that advocacy.
Yeah, first I want to be clear. The policy is currently passed out of the Law and Justice Committee. I don't think isn't bipartisan. It wouldn't be bipartisan if it stands with that. We've had some dialogue with the other side of the aisle that suggests they want a bipartisan solution. We have entered into that discussion, within our caucus, even within this call, we have some different opinions, and so we have a lot of work to do. But fundamentally, I don't think there's a disagreement on either side that we want to get folks into treatment and keep them in treatment and allow them to return to civil life. How you do that, I think, is where we start to disagree. And we believe there has to be more involvement by the criminal justice system, both by law enforcement and by prosecutors, that can have some leverage to keep people in treatment over time. So I envision a potential for a bipartisan solution that gets people into treatment but ramps the penalties up over time if they don't stay in treatment and complete the treatment. So I think that we're all, we're seeing, everybody's moved back to a gross misdemeanor, which I think is a step in the right direction. But we also need to talk about what happens when they drop out of treatment. Are there specific requirements for sentencing? Such as in the Solomon bill, does it eventually step up to a felony after 4 or 5 offenses? These are the things that are being discussed. I also think you got to be careful in the current bill. It goes down a fairly controversial path in some areas that seem to suggest heroin injection sites or needle distribution centers that are very controversial issues. If the majority wants to do that, they should do that in a separate bill and not hold up this bill by trying to insist on very liberal policy they don't have the votes for to get this solved. So it's a dialogue. I think that I'll follow all that up by saying the other side has been responsive to our suggestions. We're talking about things. I think it's still taking shape, but broadly, it'll be a focus on treatment, but also empowering law enforcement to be involved and keep people in treatment and ratchet up over time.
I think the key words Senator Braun used in there was leverage, and a lot of folks need that leverage to get the treatment. They'd like to get treatment, but unless they see an alternative that encourages them to get the treatment, they're not gonna get it. The other thing is that if you go on the gross misdemeanor approach, and certainly our current law has been an utter failure, but if you go that, the judicial infrastructure really is not there. Right now, the judicial infrastructure, our drug courts, which have been very successful, are in Superior Court. So you can change that, but that's going to take some time and effort, and I'm not sure that has been thought through as properly as it should be.
Claire, did you have a follow-up?
No, thank you.
Okay. Next, we will go to John Stang.
Drew already asked the same question I was going to ask, so I'll pass.
Okay, thank you. And in closing, I believe, Jerry, you said you had one more question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Senator Braun about his bill that's getting a hearing today on the ESSER funds. I just wanted to follow up because you'd mentioned that recess was an issue where the state was dictating to school boards what to do. As you know, school boards are struggling around the state. This bill looks like you're directing OSPI on how to spend the money and thus telling school districts how to spend their remaining ESSER funds, some of which is going into other areas. So could you explain the bill and just how much leeway will school districts have with the remaining ESSER funds under this bill?
I would say they have quite a lot of leeway. The only real requirement is they actually get after learning loss. I don't think that's too much for the state to insist that we actually instruct our children and get them. We're sliding downhill every year on the performance of our K-12 system. We're having tens of thousands of students drop out of the system because of dissatisfaction with the education they're getting. We're not telling them how to teach students. We're just telling them that they have to teach students, and they need to spend this money to teach students. And your use of the word "other" is actually pretty apropos, I guess, because if you look at how they have spent the money so far, you actually get a graph and breaks out all the different ways they could spend the money. Over 50% of that money is spent on the category "other," which leaves you wondering, is it doing any good at all for our children? I think right now the answer is obvious. We're trying to turn that around. And whether it's done in this bill or through the budget, I'm somewhat indifferent. What we have to do is send the message that we expect school districts to teach our children. We cannot accept that only 1 in 3 children are at grade level for reading or math. That should be unacceptable to every citizen in our state.
All right, with that, we'll go to closing remarks for the leaders. Representative Wilcox.
It's good talking to y'all. Interested in seeing what's happening over the next week or two. And I guess I would just ask you to help us in the House in particular, send this message. It's really good if state legislators think for themselves. Not everything should be decided in the corner offices. And I'm really glad to see signs of that in some places over in this chamber.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. Great questions. I'll just remind, we're going to stay focused on public safety, on affordability, on education. These are the things that we continue, even on day 44, week 6, that we continue to hear from folks around the state are the most important things in their lives. And that's what we need to focus on in Olympia. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.